Some say money can't buy love, but in the affluent town of Millbrook Heights, it certainly tried to destroy it. Sarah Bennett stood in her wedding dress, hours before her fairy tale ceremony, when her future in-laws made an offer they thought she couldn't refuse, a check with enough zeros to disappear. They never expected her to take it. They certainly never imagined she'd use that money to buy the very chapel where her wedding was supposed to take place. Now, the town's most prestigious venue belongs to the bride who was paid to walk away. But as the dust settles and whispers grow louder, one question echoes through Millbrook's manicured streets. Who really lost more that day? The bride who took the money, or the family who tried to buy her silence? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The leather-bound wedding planner rested heavily in Sarah Bennett's lap, its pages filled with meticulously detailed notes, swatches, and timelines. She ran her fingers over the embossed cover, tracing the gold-leafed letters that spelled out "The Perfect Day." How ironic that title seemed now. At 32, Sarah had built her reputation in Millbrook Heights from the ground up. Her event, planning business, Moments That Matter, had transformed countless celebrations from mere gatherings into unforgettable experiences. Each success story was carefully documented in that planner, alongside her own wedding preparations, a testament to both her professional expertise and personal dreams. "You've forgotten the place cards for Table 7 again," Margaret Richardson had said during their final venue walkthrough, her voice carrying that particular tone of aristocratic disapproval she'd perfected over decades of social ceremonies. "And the flower arrangements for the west entrance seem understated." The word hung in the air like a subtle indictment. Sarah had smiled professionally, adding the notes to her planner while suppressing the urge to remind her future mother-in-law that understated elegance had been her exact request 3 weeks prior. But that's what the past 18 months had been, a careful dance of accommodation and restraint. James Richardson III had swept into her life during the Palmer wedding, where she'd been coordinating and he'd been a groomsman. He'd been different from the other Richardson men, warm, genuine, with a laugh that seemed to break free from generations of careful social conditioning. When he'd asked for her number, Sarah had hesitated. She knew the Richardsons. Everyone in Millbrook Heights did. They were old money, blue blood, and carefully curated marriages. "You're nothing like I expected," he'd told her on their third date, as they shared dessert at a small bistro far from his family's usual haunts. "Most women in my circle, they're so practiced." His words had warmed her heart, even as they hinted at the challenges ahead. Sarah's own background was solidly middle class, daughter of a high school teacher and a nurse who'd sacrificed everything to send her to college. She'd worked through school, built her business from a laptop in a tiny apartment, and earned every client through word-of-mouth excellence. The Richardsons, by contrast, had a wing of the local hospital named after them. The engagements she planned for Millbrook Heights elite had given her an education in their world. She knew the unspoken rules, which vendors were acceptable, which traditions were untouchable, which faux pas could sink a family's social standing for seasons to come. She'd just never expected to navigate them as more than a professional observer. When James proposed after a year of dating, Sarah had been overjoyed, but not blind. She saw the tight smile on Margaret's face during the engagement announcement, noted how James's father cleared his throat uncomfortably when her parents arrived at the country club for the celebration dinner. Their working-class accents and earnest enthusiasm stood out among the measured tones and practiced nonchalance of the Richardson circle. "Darling, perhaps we should discuss the prenuptial agreement," Margaret had suggested one afternoon, arranging wedding invitation samples with surgical precision. Just a formality, of course. All Richardson marriages have them. The prenup had been 50 pages long, with clauses about social obligations and family event attendance that read more like a corporate merger than a marriage contract. Sarah had signed it, telling herself it was just another part of their world, like the country club memberships and charity gala committees. James had seemed apologetic, but insisted it was easier to just go along with his family's expectations. "Once we're married, things will be different," he'd promised, kissing her forehead. "They'll see the amazing woman I fell in love with." The planner in her lap contained everything she'd done to prove herself worthy of that promise. Every detail of their wedding had been chosen to bridge the gap between her taste and Richardson traditions. The venue, St. Augustine's Chapel, was the crown jewel of Millbrook Heights society, a historic landmark where generations of the town's finest families had exchanged vows. Sarah had called in every favor, worked countless extra hours to secure it for their date. She'd selected a dress that balanced elegance with propriety, flowers that spoke of old-world sophistication while incorporating subtle modern touches, and a menu that would satisfy both her father's simple tastes and the Richardsons' cultivated palates. Each choice, documented in her planner, represented a careful negotiation between two worlds. Now, as she sat in the bridal suite of St. Augustine's, surrounded by the results of all that planning, Sarah realized she'd been preparing for a merger rather than a marriage. The proof was right there in her planner, in the countless compromises and adjustments she'd made to fit the Richardson mold. She'd been so focused on becoming the perfect bride that she'd almost lost sight of the woman James had fallen in love with, the one who built something from nothing, who trusted her instincts, who didn't need generations of social standing to know her own worth. A knock at the door interrupted her reflections. "Mrs. Richardson would like a word," her assistant announced, sounding unnaturally formal. Sarah closed the planner, squaring her shoulders. Whatever came next, she would face it with the dignity she'd earned, not borrowed from a family name. The massive oil painting dominated the Richardsons' main hallway. 4 generations of the family posed before a dark mahogany backdrop, their expressions carved from the same granite as the mansion's foundation. Sarah had walked past it countless times during her engagement, each time feeling the weight of those painted eyes, judging her presence in their carefully curated world. James stood slightly apart in the portrait, his posture perfect, but his eyes holding a hint of rebellion. He'd been 25 when it was painted, fresh from his second graduate degree, and already showing signs of straining against his predetermined path. That's what had drawn them together. His desire to break free from the suffocating embrace of legacy. "You know what I love about you?" he'd asked her one evening, as they walked through the public gardens she'd transformed for the annual charity gala. "You see possibilities where others see problems." His fingers had intertwined with hers, warm against the autumn chill. "Like this event. Mother said it couldn't be done within budget, but you made it magical." Sarah had glowed under his praise, not yet understanding that in the Richardson world, exceeding expectations could be as dangerous as failing to meet them. The gala had indeed been a triumph, but Margaret's comments had focused on how resourceful Sarah was, the word dripping with subtle implications about her background. Their courtship had unfolded like a fairy tale, if fairy tales included quarterly financial disclosures and background checks discreetly conducted by family attorneys. James took her to hidden jazz clubs in the city, places where the Richardson name meant nothing and they could just be two people in love. She introduced him to the simple pleasures of Sunday dinners at her parents' modest home, where conversation flowed naturally and laughter wasn't measured in socially acceptable doses. "They're different at home," James would insist, after particularly trying family functions. "Dad actually has a wonderful sense of humor, and Mother, she's just protective. The family's been through some rough patches with fortune hunters in the past." He'd pull her close, kiss her temple. "Once they really know you, they'll understand what I see." But the painted eyes in that portrait told a different story. 3 generations of Richardson women stared out from the canvas, each one molded to Perfection by the same finishing schools, social clubs and carefully arranged marriages. Their posture spoke of tennis lessons and cotillion classes, their jewelry subtle but worth more than Sarah's entire business. The portrait had been updated every 5 years, marking the family's growth and changes. Empty spaces waited on the canvas, reserved for future Richardson wives and children. Sarah had studied those spaces during quiet moments, wondering how she would look there, if her smile would seem as practiced, her pose as natural as theirs. The artist has a remarkable gift for capturing breeding, Margaret had commented during one such moment, materializing beside Sarah with the silent grace of a society matron. Notice how the lines of the jaw, the set of the shoulders, they speak of generations of refinement. The words hung between them, heavy with unspoken meaning. James had his father's jaw, his grandfather's height, but his spirit came from somewhere else, perhaps some distant ancestor who'd broken the mold before being drawn back into the family fold. In quiet moments, he'd confess his dreams of breaking away from the family investment firm, of starting his own venture capital company focused on social entrepreneurship. "We could do it together," he'd say, his eyes alight with possibility. "Your business sense, my connections, we could build something meaningful." Those conversations always happened far from the portrait's gaze, in moments when the weight of legacy lifted briefly from his shoulders. But as the wedding approached, those moments had grown rarer. James began spending more time at the family firm, attending the right social functions, making the expected appearances. The rebellion in his painted eyes seemed to fade in real life, replaced by a resignation Sarah recognized from the portrait's other faces. "It's just temporary," he'd assured her after canceling their plans 3 weekends in a row. "Father's grooming me for a larger role in the firm. Once we're married, once everything's settled, we'll have time for our own projects." But his voice had lost its conviction, and his dreams of independence seemed to recede with each passing week. Sarah had watched the transformation with growing unease, documenting it in her planner alongside wedding preparations. James's passionate ideas for their future became footnotes to discussions about trust funds and family voting shares. Their late-night talks of building something together were replaced by meetings with financial advisors about protecting family assets. The portrait seemed to grow larger with each visit, its influence seeping into every aspect of their relationship. Sarah found herself measuring her words, adjusting her clothing choices, even modulating her laugh to match the refined atmosphere it represented. The spaces reserved for future Richardson wives felt less like opportunities and more like molds waiting to reshape whoever dared fill them. Now, standing in her wedding dress before that looming canvas, Sarah saw what she'd been trying to ignore. The James she'd fallen in love with, the one who dreamed of breaking free, was fading into his painted counterpart. The rebellion in his eyes was being replaced by the same careful mask worn by every other Richardson man in the portrait. A clock chimed somewhere in the mansion's depths, its tone as measured and refined as everything else in this world. Sarah turned away from the portrait, her reflection in a nearby mirror catching her eye. Her wedding dress, chosen to blend seamlessly with Richardson traditions, suddenly felt like a costume. In trying to fit into their portrait, she realized she'd begun to paint over her own. The security camera in the bridal suite's corner blinked silently, its red light a steady witness to what would become the most talked-about moment in Millbrook Heights social history. Later, when the footage would be requested by multiple parties, lawyers, that tiny red light would prove to be Margaret Richardson's undoing. But for now, it simply watched. "Sarah, dear, might we have a moment?" Margaret's voice carried the same measured tone she used at charity board meetings when preparing to remove an undesirable member. She stood in the doorway of the bridal suite, elegant in a custom Oscar de la Renta suit the color of aged champagne. Behind her, Sarah's assistant hovered uncertainly before being dismissed with a subtle gesture. "Of course, Margaret." Sarah rose from her vanity, careful not to wrinkle her wedding gown. The dress had cost more than her first car, a fact that hadn't gone unnoticed during the multiple fittings Margaret had insisted on attending. "Is everything all right with the arrangements?" Margaret closed the door with a soft click. The sound, somehow final in the quiet room. "The arrangements are precisely why I'm here." She moved to the suite's sitting area, perching on an antique settee with practiced grace. "Do sit with me, dear. What I'm about to say requires discretion." Sarah's impulse quickened, but her event planner's composure remained intact as she settled across from her future mother-in-law. The security camera continued its vigilant recording, capturing every nuance of what came next. "I want you to know that I've always admired your resourcefulness." Margaret opened her designer handbag, removing an envelope with the Richardson family's legal firm's letterhead. "Your ability to make something from nothing is quite remarkable. It's precisely that quality which concerns us." The air in the room seemed to thin. "I'm not sure I understand," Sarah replied, though a part of her had been expecting something like this since the day James proposed. "Let me be direct, dear. The Richardson family has certain obligations to history, to society, to the foundations and boards that rely on our guidance. Marriage into our family isn't merely a union of two people, it's an acceptance of these responsibilities." Margaret smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. "We've observed your efforts to adapt, and while they're admirable, they've only confirmed our concerns." Sarah sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, as Margaret continued. "Your background, your business, they make you wonderfully suited to planning events for our circle. But participating in those events as a Richardson, that requires a certain inherited understanding." The envelope made a soft scratching sound as Margaret slid it across the coffee table between them. "Inside, you'll find a cashier's check for an amount we believe will adequately compensate you for any inconvenience. Naturally, there's also a non-disclosure agreement. You're paying me not to marry your son." Sarah's voice was remarkably steady, even as her world tilted on its axis. "We're offering you an opportunity, dear. This amount would allow you to expand your business significantly, perhaps even franchise in other affluent communities. You're quite talented at what you do. It seems a shame to give that up for the obligations of being a Richardson wife." The check's amount had enough zeros to make Sarah's vision blur momentarily. It was more money than her business had made in the past 3 years combined. "Does James know about this?" "James understands his responsibilities, even if he occasionally rebels against them. In time, he'll thank us for protecting him from an unfortunate mistake." Margaret's smile was practiced perfection. "You must have noticed the changes in him already. The Richardson legacy has a way of realigning priorities." Sarah thought of James's fading dreams, his increasing absences, the way he'd stopped talking about their plans for the future. The security camera captured the exact moment realization dawned in her eyes. The prenup, the endless social obligations, the constant scrutiny. They weren't just tradition, were they? They were tests. Sarah stood slowly, her wedding dress rustling, like angry whispers. "Tests you never intended for me to pass. Tests you've proven our point by failing, dear. Your background shows at the most inconvenient moments. Last month's garden party, the way you helped the catering staff clear tables. A Richardson wife observes, she doesn't serve." The envelope sat between them like a loaded weapon. "And if I refuse?" Margaret's smile didn't waver. "Then we'll be forced to protect the family's interests through other means. I believe several of your largest clients have contracts with Richardson-affiliated businesses. Unfortunate conflicts of interest. Good arise, the local banks that provide your business loans. They sit on boards with us. The venue you're hoping to book for the Anderson wedding next spring, the historical society that owns it, counts 3 Richardsons among its trustees." The security camera recorded it all. The subtle threat in Margaret's tone, the calculating look in her eyes, the way her fingers drummed once, precisely on her handbag. Most importantly, it captured the moment Sarah reached for the envelope, not with defeat, but with an expression that should have warned Margaret Richardson that she had severely miscalculated. "You have 2 hours before the ceremony. Enough. Time to make a dignified exit. Illness, perhaps, or a family emergency. We'll handle the guests with appropriate discretion." Margaret stood, smoothing her suit. "I trust you'll make the sensible choice." As the door closed behind Margaret, Sarah opened the envelope with steady hands. The amount on the check made her business degree from State College feel suddenly, ironically valuable. Numbers had always been her friends, reliable, practical tools for building something from nothing. The security camera's red light blinked steadily as Sarah reached for her phone, not to cancel the wedding, but to make a very different call. "Hello, Jason? It's Sarah Bennett. Remember that conversation we had about St. Augustine's Chapel being undervalued? I think I'd like to run those numbers again." In the footage that would later become central to multiple legal proceedings, Sarah's smile was nothing like the practiced Richardson version. It was the smile of a woman who had spent her entire career turning other people's celebrations into triumph, and who had just been handed the budget for her own. The torn wedding invitation lay on the bridal suite's vanity, its gold-leafed edges catching the morning light. "Together with their families," it proclaimed in elegant script, "James Richardson III and Sarah Bennett." The rest was obscured by the tear, a jagged line through the carefully chosen words that had once meant everything. Sarah stood at the window, Margaret's check burning a hole in her clutch, watching the early arrivals filter into St. Augustine's Chapel. The historic building caught the morning sun like a photograph from another era, its stone facade and Gothic arches a testament to generations of Millbrook Heights tradition. How many other brides, she wondered, had stood in rooms like this, weighing the cost of their dreams against their dignity? Her phone buzzed again, another message from James. "Where are you? Mother's acting strange. Whatever she said, we can work through it together." Sarah's thumb hovered over the reply button, but what could she say? That his mother had put a price tag on her absence, that his family had spent 18 months orchestrating her failure. The venue's financial records filled her tablet screen. Jason, her business contact at the local bank, had sent them within minutes of her call. St. Augustine's Chapel wasn't just a wedding venue. It was a struggling historical landmark. The foundation that owned it had been quietly seeking buyers for months, trying to avoid the embarrassment of a public sale. The Richardson family had been blocking potential purchasers, hoping to acquire it themselves at a reduced price. Sarah's business degree hadn't come from an Ivy League school, but it had taught her to recognize opportunity. The check in her clutch wasn't just an insult, it was ammunition. The amount Margaret Richardson had deemed sufficient to erase a social embarrassment was almost exactly what the chapel's board needed to cover its debts and renovation costs. "You have your mother's spirit," Sarah's father had told her once, watching her negotiate her first business loan. She never let anyone tell her what she was worth. Her mother had worked double shifts as a nurse to put herself through school, earning respect in a profession that had initially dismissed her. The torn invitation caught her eye again. Beneath it lay her wedding planning journal, filled with evidence of every compromise, every subtle manipulation, every small surrender she'd made to fit the Richardson mold. But it also contained something else, proof of her business acumen, her eye for value, her ability to turn dying venues into thriving enterprises. Sarah's phone chimed with a calendar reminder. Final vendor payments due. Her smile held a hint of irony as she opened her banking app. She'd built her reputation helping others celebrate their perfect moments. Perhaps it was time to orchestrate one of her own. "Jason, yes, I'd like to move forward. No, I don't need to see the property again. I know every inch of this place." She watched another group of guests arrive, their expressions expectant. I'll need the paperwork ready today. Yes, I understand it's unusual, but I have the funds in hand. Cash offer, no financing needed. The torn invitation fluttered as she moved around the room, gathering her essentials and leaving behind the carefully chosen accessories that would have completed her Richardson transformation. The pearl earrings from Margaret, the family bracelet. Meant to be worn by Richardson brides, they looked small now, tokens of a cage she'd almost willingly entered. "Sarah?" Her assistant's voice came through the door. "The string quartet is asking about the processional timing, and Mrs. Richardson is insisting on a final check of the table arrangements. Tell them." Sarah paused, looking at her reflection. The wedding dress suddenly felt like a costume from a play she'd almost let herself believe in. "Tell them the bride has a different kind of arrangement in mind." She signed the preliminary purchase documents on her tablet, the electronic signature, as firm as her resolve. The chapel's board would meet in emergency session within the hour, eager to accept a full-price cash offer before their financial troubles became public knowledge. Margaret's check would clear by noon. By 3, the historic St. Augustine's Chapel would have a new owner. The Richardson family had spent generations building their legacy on carefully calculated decisions. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she pictured their faces when they realized she could calculate too. Her phone buzzed one final time, a text from James. "Whatever's wrong, we can fix it. Don't let Mother get to you. We're stronger than this." But they weren't stronger than this, and that was precisely the point. The James who had fallen in love with her boldness, who had dreamed of breaking free from family constraints, would have recognized the brilliance of what she was about to do. The James, who now sat on 3 foundation boards and had temporarily set aside their plans for an independent future, would be horrified. Sarah took one last look around the bridal suite, her eyes landing on the security camera that had witnessed everything. In a town built on appearances, she was about to rewrite the script. The perfect bride wasn't running away. She was buying the whole damn chapel. The guest list lay abandoned on the chapel's welcome table. Names of Millbrook Heights, finest penned in calligraphy on hand-pressed paper. 247 expected guests, each one carefully chosen to reflect the proper balance of social connections and family obligations. Now they milled about the historic chapel's grounds, their confusion turning to speculation as the minutes ticked past the ceremony's scheduled start. Inside, James Richardson III stood at the altar, his perfect posture beginning to crack. The string quartet had cycled through their prelude selections twice, each repetition adding to the growing tension. The whispers started in the back pews and rippled forward like a tide of social disaster. The florist saw her leaving. Still, in her wedding dress, Margaret Richardson was seen. The check cleared an hour ago. Margaret Richardson sat in the front pew, her champagne-colored suit as pristine as her composed expression. Only those who knew her well would notice the slight tremor in her hands as she checked her phone for the 4th time in as many minutes. The message from her bank confirming the check's clearance seemed to mock her carefully laid plans. Robert Richardson Sr. leaned over to his wife, his whisper carrying the weight of generations of controlled crises. "Tell me you didn't." But he already knew. He'd seen that particular look in Margaret's eyes before, usually right before some social climber was expertly removed from their circle. Never before had it backfired so spectacularly. In the 3rd row, Sarah's parents sat bewildered but oddly proud. They'd raised a daughter who knew her worth, even if they didn't yet know the full scope of her response to the Richardsons' attempt to buy her departure. Her mother clutched her father's hand, both of them understanding that their daughter hadn't just walked away. She'd walked towards something bigger than a society wedding. The murmurs grew louder as James's best man received a text, his eyes widening as he showed it to the groom. The local bank's board chairman, a frequent guest at Richardson family functions, had just informed his son about an unprecedented transaction. St. Augustine's Chapel, the crown jewel of Millbrook Heights. Society had just been sold to a cash buyer. James's perfect posture finally crumbled as he read the message. The rebellion that had once lit his eyes, the spark that had drawn Sarah to him, flickered briefly before being extinguished by the weight of understanding. He'd thought they could play by his family's rules and still find happiness. Sarah had seen through the game entirely and chosen to rewrite the rules instead. Perhaps, the wedding coordinator whispered to her assistant, we should begin suggesting that guests make their way to the reception venue. But even as she spoke, phones throughout the chapel lit up with notifications. The reception venue, owned by a Richardson family foundation, had just received notice that the event was cancelled. Margaret Richardson rose from her pew with the grace of a woman accustomed to managing social catastrophes. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying the practiced tone of authority. But for the first time in her social career, she found herself without a carefully prepared script. In the awkward silence that followed, Sarah's mother stood up. Unlike Margaret, she didn't need generations of social training to know what to say. "Well," she announced with the practical clarity of a woman who'd raised a daughter to think for herself, "I believe we've all witnessed something remarkable today, though perhaps not the ceremony we expected." The guest list fluttered in, the afternoon breeze, names and titles suddenly meaningless in the face of such an unprecedented social earthquake. The Richardson family had spent generations orchestrating perfect moments in this chapel, but they had never imagined that their perfectly calculated dismissal would result in losing their social sanctuary to the very woman they'd tried to dismiss. Outside, the late afternoon sun caught the chapel's Gothic windows, their stained glass casting colourful shadows across the manicured grounds. The historic venue stood as it had for generations, but its future had shifted seismically in the space of a single afternoon. The perfect wedding had transformed into something far more powerful, a declaration of independence written in cash and courage, with 247 witnesses to the revolution. The business license application form glowed on Sarah's laptop screen, its cursor blinking in the company name field as she sat in her favorite coffee shop 2 towns over. Her wedding dress hung in a garment bag across the back seat of her car, replaced by the emergency pantsuit she always kept in her office for client meetings. The irony wasn't lost on her. She'd spent months planning the perfect exit from a chapel, just not the one she'd executed today. "Wild Tea and Venue Management, LLC, she typed, a small smile playing at her lips. The name was perfect. Professional enough for business contracts, but with a subtle hint of rebellion. The timestamp on the digital application would show 4:47 p.m., exactly 2 hours after she should have been saying "I do" in the venue she now owned. Her phone buzzed continuously with messages from wedding guests, local socialites, and even a few journalists. She ignored them all, focusing instead on the emails from her lawyer and the chapel's board of trustees. The sale had been completed with remarkable efficiency. Amazing how quickly things could move when motivation, money, and meticulous planning aligned. "The board is prepared to announce the transition next week," her lawyer's email read. "However, given the circumstances, they're willing to expedite the public statement if you prefer." Sarah appreciated the board's discretion, but she had learned enough from the Richardsons to know that controlling the narrative was crucial. She opened her contact list, years of event planning having gifted her with connections throughout Millbrook Heights' social infrastructure. Linda Chen at the local newspaper had always appreciated Sarah's candid quotes about society events. Thomas Burke, who managed the town's most influential social media accounts, owed her for saving his daughters. Sweet 16 when the original venue flooded. "Linda, yes, I think I'm ready to give that exclusive you've been asking for." Sarah's voice was steady as she outlined her vision. Not about the wedding, about the future of St. Augustine's Chapel under its new management. "How does tomorrow morning sound?" Her laptop chimed with an incoming email from the chapel's maintenance supervisor. a detailed report of necessary repairs and upgrades that the Richardson-controlled board had been postponing. Sarah had already anticipated most of them. Her wedding venue research had been thorough long before she'd planned her own ceremony there. "Mr. Collins, this is Sarah Bennett." "Yes, that's Sarah Bennett." She could hear the surprise in the supervisor's voice. "I'd like to move forward with all the repairs you've recommended. No need to run it by the board. I'm the new owner. How quickly can you get crews started?" The afternoon faded into evening as Sarah methodically laid the groundwork for her next chapter. Her wedding planner, still in her car, contained every detail of how the Richardsons ran their social events. Now it would become the blueprint for revolutionizing them. Her phone lit up with a message from her mother. "Dad and I are so proud. You did what I always taught you, valued yourself first. Also, we took the wedding cake. No sense wasting good buttercream on bad decisions." Sarah laughed for the first time since morning, the sound drawing curious glances from nearby coffee shop patrons who'd been pretending not to recognize her. Let them look. Let them wonder. Let them see a woman building something rather than running away. The final document of the day arrived in her inbox, the chapel's event calendar, showing all upcoming bookings. 3 Richardson-adjacent weddings were scheduled for the next 6 months. Sarah noted with professional satisfaction that none of their contracts included clauses about changes in venue ownership. "Please inform all current clients," she wrote, to the chapel's events coordinator, that their celebrations will proceed as planned, with complimentary upgrades to be discussed individually. She paused, then added, "And please update the venue's mission statement to emphasize our commitment to hosting diverse, inclusive celebrations." As darkness fell outside the coffee shop windows, Sarah reviewed her day's work. Business license pending, press strategy in motion, renovation scheduled, and a clear message sent to Millbrook Heights Society. St. Augustine's Chapel was under new management, and its doors would now be open to everyone who valued love over lineage. She closed her laptop, gathered her things, and headed for her car. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but tonight she had something better than a wedding reception. She had a revolution to plan. The property deed to St. Augustine's Chapel sat framed on Sarah's new office wall, its official seal gleaming in the morning light. She'd chosen to display it directly opposite the antique mirror where generations of Richardson brides had made their final adjustments before walking down the aisle. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but then again, subtlety hadn't gotten her this far. "The contractors can start on the East Wing renovations tomorrow," her new facility manager reported, pointing to blueprints spread across what had once been the chapel's ornate signing table. "Though Mrs. Richardson has already called twice to express her concerns about preserving the historical integrity of the space." "Funny," Sarah replied, adjusting the modern art piece she'd hung behind her desk. "I don't recall seeing any Richardson names on this deed. Please proceed as planned." The renovation would transform the chapel's notoriously cramped bridal suite into a modern preparation space twice its current size. The Richardson women had always complained about the room's limitations while blocking every proposed upgrade. Now they'd have to watch it change from the outside. Her phone lit up with another call from the family's lawyers. She let it go to voicemail, already knowing the content. More thinly veiled threats about historical preservation societies and zoning boards. But Sarah had done her homework. The chapel's designation as a historical landmark protected its exterior and main sanctuary, but left plenty of room for interior modernization. "Miss Bennett," her assistant poked her head in, "the Anderson wedding party is here for their tour, and Mrs. Richardson is with them." Sarah smoothed her blazer, a designer piece she'd bought with her first profits, not family money. Perfect. Timing. "Please show them to the main hall and make sure the new brochures are displayed prominently." The Anderson wedding had been booked months ago when the chapel was still under Richardson influence. The family had probably promised the usual preferential treatment, the kind that came with proper social connections. They were about to learn how things worked under new management. Margaret, Sarah greeted her former almost mother-in-law with professional warmth. How lovely to see you supporting the Andersons' celebration planning, though I should mention that all client meetings are now strictly by appointment. Margaret's smile was glacier cold. Sarah, dear, I trust you'll maintain the chapel's standards. The Andersons are very particular about tradition. Oh, we're elevating standards significantly. Sarah gestured to the architectural renderings displayed on easels throughout the hall. Full renovation of the preparation spaces, updated sound system, and of course our new inclusive booking policy. Merit, not membership in certain social circles, will determine priority dates. The Anderson bride's eyes lit up at the mention of renovations. Her mother, however, shot a worried glance at Margaret. The Richardson influence on social events had always been absolute, until now. We're also introducing a new pricing structure, Sarah continued, handing out pristine brochures embossed with the chapel's new logo. No more variable rates based on personal connections. Every couple receives the same exceptional service at transparent prices. Margaret's perfectly manicured fingers clenched around her designer handbag. The Historical Society Board has already approved our renovation plans, Sarah interrupted smoothly. In fact, they were quite enthusiastic about our commitment to making the chapel financially sustainable through modernization. I believe several board members were concerned about the venue's previous financial management. The deed on the wall caught the sunlight, its official text clearly visible to everyone in the room. Sarah watched the Anderson family process the shift in power dynamics. The mother's nervous glances at Margaret were becoming less frequent, while the bride was already pointing excitedly at the renovation plans. Now then, Sarah moved toward the sanctuary, her heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. Shall we discuss your vision for your celebration? Our new planning team specializes in blending traditional elements with contemporary sophistication. The Andersons followed, leaving Margaret standing alone in the entrance hall. The woman who had once tried to buy Sarah's absence was now the outsider, watching her influence slip away under the weight of an official property deed and a better business model. Later that afternoon, Sarah added another frame to her office wall, the chapel's new mission statement. Professionally designed and prominently featuring the words "Welcome, Inclusive, and Future." Below it, she hung a small photo of her parents at their own modest wedding, a reminder that true celebration needed no pedigree. The deed caught the late afternoon light again, its seal a testament to how quickly power could shift when someone called the Richardson family's bluff. Sarah smiled as she reviewed the day's bookings, 3 new appointments with couples who would have never dared approach St. Augustine's chapel under its previous management. Change, it seemed, was already in the air. Local wedding venue under new management by Linda Chen, Millbrook Heights Gazette, Society section. In a move that has sent ripples through Millbrook Heights social circles, St. Augustine's Chapel, the town's most prestigious wedding venue for over a century, has announced new ownership and a bold vision for its future. Sarah Bennett, a respected local event planner, has acquired the historic property and plans to modernize both its facilities and its booking policies. St. Augustine's Chapel has always been more than just a venue, Bennett stated in an exclusive interview. It's a symbol of life's most meaningful celebrations. Our goal is to ensure those celebrations are accessible to all couples who dream of starting their journey here, regardless of their social connections. The chapel, which has traditionally operated under the influence of the Richardson family's various charitable foundations, will undergo significant renovations while maintaining its historic character. Sources close to the previous management declined to comment on the circumstances of the sale. Sarah folded the newspaper carefully, adding it to her growing collection of press coverage. Linda Chen had done a masterful job, every word technically accurate while letting readers draw their own conclusions about the timing of her purchase and her cancelled wedding to James Richardson III. Her phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the J article hit newsstands. Event planners she'd worked with for years sent congratulatory messages tinged with relief. They'd all dealt with the Richardson family's stranglehold on premier venues. Couples who'd been politely but firmly steered away from St. Augustine's Chapel in the past cautiously inquired about available dates. The Morgan Chen wedding just confirmed for spring, her assistant reported, adding another post-it to their rapidly filling calendar. They specifically mentioned reading about our new inclusive booking policy. Also, 3 Richardson-adjacent events have requested transfer of their deposits. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. The social exodus was expected. Margaret's influence guaranteed it. But for every cancellation, 3 new bookings appeared, couples drawn by the promise of merit-based consideration and transparent pricing. "Did you see their faces?" her father asked over dinner that evening, proudly displaying the newspaper article on their modest dining table. "All those years they looked down on us, and now my girl owns their precious chapel." Her mother simply squeezed her hand, understanding that this was about more than revenge. It was about transformation. The local business community took notice too. The Chamber of Commerce, long dominated by Richardson affiliates, suddenly found room in their newsletter for a feature on innovative venue management. Small business owners who'd hesitated to approach St. Augustine's Chapel with their events began scheduling tours. "Your security deposit requirements are actually reasonable," remarked one local restaurateur, booking the chapel's newly renovated reception hall for his daughter's quinceañera. The Richardsons wanted 3 times this amount plus membership considerations. Social media buzzed with before and after photos of the renovation work. Sarah's business account gained thousands of followers as she documented the chapel's transformation. Each post subtly emphasized the venue's new direction. "Historic beauty meets modern inclusivity" became their tagline, a direct challenge to the old order's exclusivity. Even James's younger sister, Rebecca, always the family rebel, sent a private message. "What you did, it's what I always wish someone would do. Show them that their money can't control everything. P.S. Can we talk about booking my art gallery's spring showcase?" The Richardson family's response came through their usual channels. Subtle pressure on vendors, whispered concerns about maintaining standards, careful suggestions that working with the chapel might impact other social opportunities. But Sarah had anticipated this, signing contracts with suppliers who valued profit over social politics. "Darling, have you seen this article?" Margaret's voice dripped concern when Sarah finally accepted one of her calls. "The implications about our family's involvement with the chapel are entirely accurate," Sarah finished smoothly. "The paper trail of the Foundation's management decisions is quite detailed. Would you like me to share it with Linda for a follow-up piece?" The silence that followed was worth every penny of the purchase price. By month's end, the chapel's calendar was filled with a diversity of celebrations that would have been unimaginable under previous management. Sarah kept the newspaper article, framed beside the property deed, twin testaments to how quickly the right story, backed by legitimate power, could reshape a community's narrative. Grand reopening celebration, St. Augustine's Chapel, under the new management of Wild Tea and Venue Management, LLC. You are cordially invited to experience the renewal of Millbrook Heights' most beloved landmark. Join us for an evening of celebration, as we honor tradition while embracing a future of inclusive excellence. Live music, gourmet refreshments, guided tours, special performance by the Millbrook Heights Chamber, Orchestra Friday, $7 p.m., black tie optional. All are welcome. Sarah. studied the invitation one final time before approving it for distribution. The elegant cardstock matched the chapel's historical aesthetic, but the wording deliberately broke from the stuffy formality of typical Millbrook Heights social announcements. "All are welcome" would never have appeared on a Richardson-approved invitation. The guest list just passed 400 confirmations, her events director reported, tablet in hand, including the mayor, 3 city council members, and, surprisingly, the entire Historical Society board. The Richardson contingent has been notably silent. "They'll come," Sarah replied, adjusting a spectacular arrangement of locally sourced wildflowers. Margaret Richardson has never missed a major social event, even one that challenges her authority. The question is whether they'll arrive early to assert dominance or late to make an entrance. The chapel gleamed in the afternoon light, its renovations complete. The expanded bridal suite now featured floor-to-ceiling windows and modern amenities. The reception hall's updated lighting system could transform the space from traditional elegance to contemporary chic at the touch of a button. Every change respected the venue's history while declaring its evolution. "Miss Bennett?" Her assistant appeared with a nervous smile. "The chamber orchestra is ready for sound check. The caterers are setting up in the new kitchen, and James Richardson just called. He asked if he could stop by before the event." Privately, Sarah paused in her adjustment of the flowers. She'd known this moment would come, had prepared for it mentally since the day she'd walked away. "Tell him 4 o'clock. He can use the side entrance if he wants to avoid being seen." At precisely 4, James appeared in her office doorway, looking both familiar and strange in his perfectly tailored suit. The rebellion she'd once loved in him had been fully replaced by Richardson polish. "The place looks amazing," he offered, taking in the modern art and the prominently displayed deed. "Though Mother is having fits about the removal of Great-Aunt Prudence's portrait from the main hall. Prudence has been relocated to the historical display in the East Wing," Sarah replied professionally. "Along with other artifacts from the chapel's past, we're honoring history without being trapped by it." James moved further into the office, his discomfort visible beneath his practiced composure. "What you did, taking Mother's check, buying the chapel, it was brilliant and terrifying. The family has never faced anything like it. That was rather the point." "I know." He ran a hand through his carefully styled hair, a gesture that reminded her of the James she'd first fallen for. "I should have stood up to them, should have been stronger." Sarah looked at him thoughtfully. "No, James, you should have been yourself, the man who wanted to break free, who dreamed of making his own mark. Instead, you chose to be what they wanted, and you chose to rewrite the rules entirely." His smile held a touch of regret. "The Richardson family won't attend tonight, Mother's orders, but I'll be here. Some rules deserve to be broken." After he left, Sarah stood at her office window, watching the final preparations below. Caterers wheeled in elegant displays of cuisine that ranged from traditional to contemporary fusion. The chamber orchestra began their warm-up, their music drifting through halls that had once echoed only with approved classical selections. Her parents arrived early, her father beaming in his new suit, her mother radiant in a dress they'd chosen. Together, they carried themselves with the natural dignity of people who knew their own worth, needing no social approval to validate their presence. As twilight approached, the chapel's new lighting system activated, washing the historic facade. In subtle illumination, guests began to arrive. A mix of familiar faces from Sarah's event planning days, local business owners who'd never been invited to Richardson-approved functions, and yes, even some members of Millbrook Heights' old guard, their curiosity overcoming their social allegiance. Sarah stood at the entrance, greeting each arrival with genuine warmth. She wore a designer dress in the chapel's new signature color, its style broadcasting success rather than submission. The property deed might have given her ownership of the building, but this evening would establish her ownership of its future. James arrived exactly on time, alone, but standing tall. Their eyes met briefly, acknowledging what had been lost and what had been gained. Then Sarah turned to welcome the next guests, her smile genuine and unwavering. The chapel's grand reopening wasn't just a social event, it was a declaration of independence written in candlelight and celebration, witnessed by a community on the cusp of change. Security system installation receipt, Wild Tea and Venue Management, LLC St. Augustine's Chapel Premium Package. Installation 24/7 video surveillance, digital access control, motion sensors, remote monitoring backup power system. Total, $24,175 money. Well spent, Sarah murmured, filing the receipt as Margaret Richardson's Mercedes pulled into the chapel's private parking area. The security cameras tracked the older woman's progress from her car to the side entrance, an entrance she'd used countless times during her years of unofficial oversight. This time, however, the door remained locked. Mrs. Richardson here, too. "I see you," her assistant's voice crackled over the intercom. "She says it's urgent." The slight emphasis on urgent spoke volumes about the number of times Margaret had attempted this visit over the past week. "Please escort her to the main conference room," Sarah replied, gathering the documents she'd prepared for exactly this conversation. "And make sure the security cameras in there are running." Margaret Richardson's entrance was a masterclass in society matron intimidation, designer suit perfectly pressed, family jewelry catching the light, her expression set in concerned disappointment. "Sarah, darling, we need to discuss this situation you've created. The situation where I invested your money in prime real estate, or the situation where your family's financial mismanagement of this property has come to light." Sarah kept her tone professional as she took her seat at the head of the conference table, Margaret's former position. "You've made your point." Margaret's smile was tight. "Very clever, using our gift to acquire the chapel. The family is prepared to make it right. Name your price, double what you paid, triple if necessary." Sarah slid a folder across the table. "These are the chapel's financial records from the past 5 years. Interesting reading. The Historical Society Board was particularly concerned about certain irregularities in the maintenance budget allocations." The color drained slightly from Margaret's perfectly made-up face. "Those records are confidential, were confidential. As the new owner, I had them audited, standard business practice." Sarah opened another folder. "I've also reviewed all the vendor contracts. The inflation on certain services provided by Richardson-affiliated companies, was quite remarkable." Margaret's fingers tightened around her handbag. "The chapel has always operated according to established traditions. The tradition of overcharging certain couples while offering discounts to socially connected families, or the tradition of blocking necessary upgrades while pocketing the maintenance fees." Sarah's voice remained calm, but her eyes were steel. "The authorities tend to frown on such traditional practices. Are you threatening us?" "Not at all. I'm explaining why the chapel isn't for sale at any price." Sarah stood, smoothing her skirt. "Now, if you'd like to book the venue for an event, my staff will be happy to provide our standard rate sheet. The same rates apply to everyone now, regardless of their social standing." Margaret rose, her composure cracking slightly. "This isn't over. The Richardson family has influenced this town for generations. One upstart with a lucky investment can't change that." "You're right about one thing," Sarah agreed, pressing the intercom. "Please escort Mrs. Richardson out through the main entrance. She doesn't have security clearance for the private exits anymore." After Margaret's departure, Sarah reviewed the security footage, watching the older woman's carefully measured stride falter as she passed the newly renovated areas. Each improvement, each modern touch, stripped away another layer of Richardson influence. Her phone buzzed with a text from James. "Mother's on the warpath. The family's pulling strings with vendors, trying to pressure you. Be careful. She'd expected this, had prepared for it since the day she took Margaret's check. The new security system was just the first line of defense. Her vendors were secured, with airtight contracts, her staff carefully chosen for their professional integrity rather than their social connections. The chapel's event calendar chimed with a new booking. Rebecca Richardson's art gallery showcase, deliberately scheduled, on the same night as a major Richardson family function. The younger Richardson's rebellion was becoming deliciously public. Sarah's assistant appeared with fresh coffee and a knowing smile. The Historical Society Board called. They're very impressed with our renovation work and would like to feature the chapel in their annual heritage tour. Apparently, several board members are reconsidering their associations with certain family foundations. The security cameras blinked steadily, recording another day of change at St. Augustine's Chapel. Sarah had learned from the Richardsons, had watched them wield influence through careful documentation and strategic alliances. Now she was using those same lessons to dismantle their control, one perfectly legal, thoroughly documented step at a time. She picked up the security system receipt, tracing the total with a satisfied smile. The Richardson family had spent generations building their power through whispered threats and social pressure. They weren't prepared for an opponent who conducted business in broad daylight, with cameras running and receipts filed. A message from her lawyer popped up. Historical Society audit proceeding as planned. Richardson Foundation involvement in chapel finances raises several regulatory concerns. How would you like to proceed? Sarah thought of Margaret's thinly veiled threats, of James's warning, of generations of couples who'd been deemed unworthy of celebrating their love in this chapel. Her reply was simple: proceed with full disclosure. It's time for a new tradition of transparency. The security cameras caught her smile as she turned back to her work. Some people bought security systems to keep threats out. Sarah had installed hers to ensure that every Richardson move, every attempted pressure tactic, every subtle threat would be documented, time-stamped, and legally actionable. Let them come. She had nothing to hide. Profit and loss statement. Wild Tea and Venue Management, LLC Q3 2025 revenue. Events booked, plus 287% YOY average booking value, plus 42% YOY total revenue, 1.2 MEM, 315% YOY expenses, renovations, complete, 450K, operating costs, 320K, marketing, 75K. Staff, 180K net, profit, 175K. Notes, first quarter of profitability since acquisition. Projected Q4 bookings exceed capacity. Sarah set the financial report aside as another tour group moved through the chapel's main hall, their excited murmurs echoing off the restored architectural details. The renovation costs had been steep, but the return on investment was exceeding even her most optimistic projections. The Hamilton Chen wedding was featured in 3 bridal magazines, her marketing director reported, dropping the latest publications. On Sarah's desk, they're calling us the Northeast's most progressive historical venue and a testament to modern inclusivity in traditional spaces. The photos spread across glossy pages showed the chapel in its full glory. Historic grandeur, enhanced by modern amenities, traditional elements seamlessly blending with contemporary design. But more striking were the couples featured, interracial, same-sex, different faiths, all celebrating their love in a space that had once been reserved for a select few. The Richardsons' country club venue is struggling, her assistant mentioned, trying and failing to hide a satisfied smile. Apparently, their traditional values approach isn't attracting the younger generation. They've had 6 cancellations this month alone. Sarah didn't take pleasure in their struggles. Well, perhaps a little, but she understood the shift. Millbrook Heights was changing. The old guard's influence was waning as new money and new values reshaped the social landscape. The chapel's event calendar was a testament to that change. Corporate events mixed with weddings, charitable galas, shared space with cultural celebrations. Each successful event brought more bookings, as people realized that excellence didn't require exclusivity. The waiting list for premium dates is now 8 months long, her events coordinator announced during their weekly meeting. And the Richardson family's annual Christmas gala, they've asked about availability here. Through an intermediary, of course. Sarah raised an eyebrow at that. The Richardson Christmas Gala was their signature social event, traditionally held at their country club. Moving it would be a public admission of defeat and a delicious irony. Quote them our standard rates, she decided. No special treatment, positive or negative. Let them see how merit-based booking actually works. The chapel's success was reshaping. More than just the local event scene. Other venues in town began adopting similar inclusive policies. Vendors who had once bowed to Richardson pressure now proudly advertised their association with St. Augustine's Chapel. Rebecca Richardson's art gallery showcase had been a turning point. The event drew a younger, more diverse crowd than the chapel had ever hosted under its previous management. When photos of Margaret's youngest daughter celebrating in the renovated space hit social media, the last barriers of social resistance began to crumble. The Historical Society wants to present us with their annual Preservation Award, her assistant said, adding another item to Sarah's increasingly busy calendar. Apparently, our renovation work has set a new standard for modernizing historical properties while maintaining their character. The profit and loss statement told the story in numbers, but the real success was written in the faces of couples who toured the chapel and saw possibility instead of judgment. Every booking was a small victory over the system that had once deemed Sarah herself unworthy. Her phone buzzed with a message from James. Mother's finally admitting you've won. Not in so many words, but she's talking about adapting to changing times at board meetings. You've done the impossible. You've made the Richardsons change. Sarah glanced at the financial report again, but her attention was caught by a photo. On her wall, her parents at their modest wedding, radiating joy without a hint of pretense. She'd kept it as a reminder of what celebrations should be about: love, commitment, and authenticity. The chapel's bells chimed the hour, their sound carrying across Millbrook Heights with a new resonance. Under the Richardsons' management, they had tolled for tradition and exclusivity. Now they rang for something far more valuable, the freedom to celebrate love in all its forms, without apology or permission. Dear Miss Bennett, my wedding at St. Augustine's Chapel was everything I dreamed it would be, not despite the Richardson family's disapproval, but because of how you've transformed their rejection into something beautiful. 5 years ago, they deemed my Indian-American family not quite suitable for their venue. Today, our fusion celebration in your restored chapel made headlines for all the right reasons. You've created more than a venue. You've built a sanctuary for all of us who were once told we didn't belong. Thank you for showing Millbrook Heights that tradition can embrace change without losing its soul. Warmest regards, Dr. Priya Patel, Chief of Surgery, Millbrook Heights. Memorial Hospital. Sarah added the handwritten note to her growing collection of thank you cards, each one a testament to the chapel's evolution. Dr. Patel's wedding had been particularly satisfying. The Richardson family had donated the hospital's surgical wing, but they couldn't stop its chief surgeon from celebrating her marriage in their former social fortress. You've started quite the movement, Elizabeth Whitman remarked, settling into one of the chapel office's elegant visitor chairs. As the former fiancée of another Richardson scion, she'd been similarly encouraged to step aside years ago. Now she ran the city's most successful real estate firm. 3 more Richardson-adjacent properties are coming up for sale. Interested in expanding your empire? Sarah smiled, remembering how Elizabeth had been one of the first to book the chapel after its renovation, Her 20th anniversary vow renewal to the local artist she'd married instead of the Richardson heir had set attendance records. "One fortress at a time," Sarah replied, but she kept the property listings Elizabeth left behind. The chapel's success had taught her the value of strategic timing. "Ms. Bennett." Her assistant appeared with an unusual expression, somewhere between amusement and disbelief. "Mrs. Richardson Sr. is here, not Margaret, Catherine, James's grandmother." The family matriarch hadn't been seen in public since her husband's passing 2 years ago. Her arrival could mean anything from an old guard attack to something more interesting. Catherine Richardson's entrance was more Queen Elizabeth than society matron, elegant, measured, and radiating the kind of authority that had nothing to do with money. "Well," she said, surveying the modernized office, "oh, you've certainly improved Augustus's old hunting lodge." Sarah blinked. "I'm sorry, hunting lodge?" "Oh, yes, dear. Before it was a chapel, this building was my late husband's grandfather's hunting lodge. The family converted it when they realized wedding venues were more profitable than hunting parties." Catherine settled regally into a chair. "Margaret conveniently forgets that part of our history, that the Richardsons were once considered nouveau riche upstarts ourselves." The revelation shifted something in Sarah's understanding of the Richardson dynasty. "I wasn't aware. No one is, dear. Margaret spent decades burying anything that doesn't fit her narrative of unbroken social superiority." Catherine's eyes sparkled with surprising mischief. "Which is why I'm here. The family archives in my possession tell quite a different story about St. Augustine's Chapel. Stories that might interest the Historical Society." Sarah leaned forward. "I'm listening. Margaret's pressure campaign against your venue? I've seen it before. They did the same to my family's shipping business when Augustus wanted to marry me. The Richardson name wasn't always old money, you see. They just learned to act the part better than most." The older woman pulled out a thick folder, photographs, documents, and letters chronicling the chapel's true history. "Consider this ammunition, dear. Though from what I've seen, you're doing quite well in this battle already. More allies emerged as autumn turned to winter. The catering company that had been persuaded to drop the chapel from their venue list now sought to renew their contract at better rates. The florist, who'd feared Richardson retaliation, began creating spectacular arrangements for chapel events. Her work featured in design magazines. Even the Historical Society board, long a Richardson stronghold, started pushing back against Margaret's influence. The chapel's successful modernization had proved that progress and preservation could coexist, making the family's resistance to change seem increasingly outdated. The Richardson Christmas Gala inquiry. Sarah's events director reported during their morning meeting. It wasn't an intermediary, it was Rebecca Richardson officially. She's taken over the family's events committee. Apparently, there was quite the power struggle at the last foundation meeting. Sarah thought of the thank you cards in her office, each one representing someone who'd refused to be excluded. The chapel had become more than a venue. It was proof that the old barriers could fall, that tradition could evolve without breaking. Catherine Richardson's parting words echoed in her mind. What Margaret never understood is that power doesn't come from keeping people out. It comes from letting them in, on their own terms, with their own dreams. You figured that out faster than my family did. The chapel bells rang for another celebration, their sound carrying across a changing Millbrook Heights. Each chime reminded Sarah of another note in her collection, another ally found, another small victory in the quiet revolution she'd started with a single act of defiance. "My dearest James, as your mother, I've always believed I knew what was best for you and our family. Recent events, however, have forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my actions, particularly regarding Sarah Bennett. The check I offered her that morning wasn't the first time I'd interfered. What you don't know, what none of the family knows, is that I've been orchestrating these selections for years." Sarah wasn't the first potential spouse I paid to disappear. She was simply the first one clever enough to use my own weapons. Against me, the Morton girl in college, the Parker boy during your law school years. They were all eliminated through similar arrangements. I convinced myself it was for the family's benefit that maintaining our social position required such measures. The truth is, I was terrified of losing control. I see now that my actions have cost this family far more than money. We've lost the respect of our community, the trust of our peers, and most importantly, the happiness of our children. Sarah's transformation of the chapel has shown me how badly I misjudged her, and how thoroughly I underestimated her. Perhaps it's time for the Richardson family to learn from those we once sought to exclude. With regret, Margaret, the leaked letter, spread through Millbrook Heights social circles like wildfire. Sarah received a copy from 3 different sources before breakfast, including one from Catherine Richardson herself, with a handwritten note. The truth always finds its way out, dear, especially when someone helps it along. Sarah sat in her office, watching the morning light filter through the chapel's restored stained glass windows. The letter's revelation wasn't entirely surprising. She'd suspected Margaret's influence in James's past relationships, but seeing it confirmed in Margaret's own words was something else entirely. "James is trying to reach you," her assistant said via intercom. "So is every news outlet in the state. The Richardson family lawyer has already issued 3 cease and desist letters to local papers, but Catherine Richardson's giving interviews, confirming everything. The story was spreading beyond Millbrook Heights. Regional papers picked it up first, then national outlets. Social gatekeeping exposed how one mother's manipulation backfired, read one headline. Chapel purchase reveals years of social engineering, declared another. Sarah's phone lit up with a message from Elizabeth Whitman. Well, this explains why David suddenly got that incredible job opportunity in Seattle right before our engagement. Drinks later, I'm buying. The Richardson family's carefully maintained facade was cracking. Years of Margaret's social engineering were coming to light as others came forward with their stories. The Parker boy, now a successful tech entrepreneur, gave a scathing interview about the mysterious scholarship that had suddenly required him to study abroad. The Morton girl's mother revealed the convenient internship that had pulled her daughter away from James. The Historical Society Board is calling an emergency meeting, her assistant reported. Apparently, there are concerns about other Richardson family arrangements involving venue access and event permissions over the years. Sarah stood at her office window, watching another tour group explore the chapel grounds. Her vision for the venue had always been about more than revenge. It was about creating something genuine in a world of carefully manufactured appearances. A knock at her door revealed James, looking both exhausted and oddly relieved. "I should have known," he said without preamble. "All those relationships that ended mysteriously, I convinced myself it was bad luck." "You saw what you were raised to see," Sarah replied, feeling an unexpected sympathy for her former fiancé. "We all did for a long time. Rebecca's taking over the family foundation," he continued, running a hand through his hair, a gesture that reminded her of the James she'd first fallen for. "She's launching a full audit of past practices, mothers being encouraged to step back from all board positions." Sarah thought of the thank you cards in her collection, each one representing someone who'd found their place in the chapel, despite the old barriers. "Change isn't always comfortable," she observed, "but it's usually necessary." "The family lawyer wants to discuss a settlement," James added, "to prevent further revelations." "I'm not interested in settlements," Sarah replied, turning back to the window. "I'm interested in transformation. The chapel's doing exactly what it should, showing people that tradition and exclusivity aren't the same thing." As James left, Sarah picked up her phone and began composing a public statement. Not about Margaret's letter or the Richardson family's embarrassment, but about the chapel's continued commitment to celebrating all love stories, all milestones, all moments that deserve to be honored. The morning sun caught the chapel's new welcome sign, "All Love. Welcomes here." It had replaced the old Richardson family crest, just as truth was replacing pretense, authenticity overtaking appearance. Margaret's leaked letter hadn't just exposed the past, it had confirmed the necessity of change. Mediation meeting minutes, date December 15th, 2025. Location, St. Augustine's Chapel Conference Room. Present, Sarah Bennett. Owner, Wild Tea and Venue Management, LLC. Margaret Richardson. Former board member, Richardson Family Foundation. Catherine Richardson, family matriarch. Rebecca Richardson, new director, Richardson Family Foundation. James Richardson III, observer. Elizabeth Chen, Escurn, independent mediator. Purpose: to discuss future relationship between St. Augustine's Chapel and Richardson family interests. The tension in the conference room was palpable as Elizabeth Chen reviewed her notes. "Let's be clear about our objectives," the mediator began. "We're not here to litigate the past, but to establish a framework for moving forward." Margaret Richardson sat perfectly straight, her usual society armor showing distinct cracks. The public exposure of her machinations had taken their toll. But there was something else in her expression today, something that looked almost like respect when she glanced at Sarah. "The Foundation proposes a joint charitable initiative," Rebecca announced, sliding documents across the table, "converting the chapel's East Wing into a community event space, funded by Richardson Resources but managed under Wild Tea's inclusive policies." Sarah studied the proposal. It was comprehensive, progressive, and completely unlike the Richardson family's usual approach. "This was your idea, wasn't it?" she asked Rebecca, who smiled in confirmation. "The old way isn't working anymore?" Rebecca replied, shooting a meaningful look at her mother. "The Foundation's donations are down 40% since the revelations. We need to evolve or become irrelevant." Catherine Richardson, elegant as ever in her corner chair, nodded approvingly at her granddaughter. "Sometimes it takes an outsider to show us our own blind spots," she observed, her gaze meeting Sarah's. "Though I suppose you're hardly an outsider anymore, dear. You've become quite the force in Millbrook Heights." Margaret shifted uncomfortably. "The Foundation is prepared to acknowledge past mistakes in exchange for your cooperation in presenting a united front moving forward." "You mean you want to save face?" Sarah translated, but without rancor. The woman who had once tried to buy her silence looked smaller somehow, more human in her vulnerability. "I mean," Margaret said carefully, "that perhaps both sides could benefit from demonstrating that growth is possible. Even for old institutions, even for old attitudes." James, silent until now, leaned forward. "What Mother's trying to say is that you've won, Sarah. Not just the chapel or the social standing, you've won the argument about what really matters in building a community." Sarah looked around the table, seeing the shifts in dynamics clearly. Rebecca's quiet confidence as she presented progressive ideas, Catherine's subtle orchestration of family evolution, even Margaret's grudging recognition that times had changed, and James, finally looking comfortable in his own skin, freed from the weight of family expectations. The chapel was never about winning, Sarah said finally. It was about creating space for everyone's stories to be celebrated. If the Richardson Foundation is genuinely interested in that mission, we can discuss collaboration. Elizabeth Chen made careful notes as terms were discussed. The East Wing would become the Richardson Bennett Community Center, hosting events for local non-profits at reduced rates. The foundation would establish a scholarship for event management students from diverse backgrounds. And most significantly, the chapel's inclusive booking policy would be permanently enshrined in its charter. "There's one more thing," Margaret said as the meeting concluded. She withdrew an envelope, similar to the one she'd offered Sarah on that fateful wedding morning, but her hands trembled slightly as she presented it. A personal apology and a promise to do better. Inside was a letter, not a check. Sarah read it silently, noting the careful handwriting and the uncharacteristic humility of the words. When she finished, she folded it precisely and met Margaret's eyes. "Apology accepted," she said simply. "Now shall we discuss the winter calendar? I believe the Richardson Christmas Gala is still seeking a venue." As the others filed out, Catherine lingered. "You know, dear," she mused, "in all the years the Richardsons have owned this chapel, it's never felt more like a true sanctuary than it does now. Perhaps that's what we were missing all along, the understanding that real tradition isn't about keeping people out, it's about welcoming them in." Sarah watched through her office window as the Richardson family departed, not in defeat but in transformation. The chapel bells chimed, and for the first time, their sound seemed to speak not of power maintained, but of grace extended and received. Millbrook Heights, Chamber of Commerce. Annual Business Excellence Awards Entrepreneur of the Year presented to Sarah Bennett for outstanding innovation in business leadership and exceptional contribution to community transformation. In recognition of revolutionary approach to historic venue management, promotion of inclusive business practices, significant economic impact on local community, leadership in social change, December 2025, Sarah traced the embossed lettering on the award certificate, remembering the young event planner who had once carefully navigated Millbrook Heights' social restrictions. The irony of receiving this honor in the Richardson-owned country club wasn't lost on her, nor was the fact that Rebecca Richardson had insisted on presenting it. "Your vision for St. Augustine's Chapel has redefined what's possible in our community," Rebecca had declared from the podium, her voice carrying the authority of the Richardson name, but none of its former condescension. "You showed us that tradition, and progress aren't enemies, they're partners in creating a better future." The audience had included faces from both sides of Millbrook Heights' social evolution, old guard families sitting alongside the diverse couples whose celebrations had transformed the chapel's reputation. Dr. Priya Patel, whose Indian-American fusion wedding had made national headlines, chatted easily with Catherine Richardson about hospital board initiatives. Even Margaret had attended, sitting quietly at the family table, watching her carefully constructed social hierarchy reshape itself into something more inclusive. Her public apology in the local paper had surprised everyone, except perhaps Sarah, who had seen glimpses of the woman beneath the society matron's armor during their mediation sessions. "The applications for our event management scholarship program are overwhelming," Rebecca reported during their weekly foundation meeting. The Richardson-Bennett initiative had attracted candidates from backgrounds that would have been unthinkable in the chapel's exclusive past. "We'll need to expand the funding for next year." Sarah's office, once dominated by traditional portraits and social calendars, now showcased a different kind of history. The Entrepreneur Award hung alongside photos of groundbreaking celebrations, same-sex weddings, multicultural ceremonies, interfaith unions. Each image represented not just an event, but a barrier broken. "The Historical Society wants to feature the chapel in their next documentary," her marketing director announced, adding to the morning's updates. "They're calling it Revolution in White, How One Venue Changed a Community." They want to focus on how we've preserved tradition while embracing change. The chapel's success had sparked a wider transformation in Millbrook Heights. Other venues had adopted similar inclusive policies, vendors had diversified their services, and the rigid social calendar that had once dictated community life had given way to a more organic, vibrant scene. "The Richardson Christmas Gala was our most successful event yet," her events coordinator reported, reviewing the previous week's numbers. Margaret actually smiled when she saw the fusion menu and multicultural entertainment. "I think she even took seconds of the tandoori turkey." The award ceremony had marked more than professional recognition. It represented Millbrook Heights' acknowledgement that real change was possible. Sarah's vision for the chapel had shown that tradition could adapt without losing its essence. That exclusivity wasn't the same as excellence. James had approached her at the ceremony's end, looking more relaxed than she'd ever seen him in his family's social orbit. "You didn't just change the chapel," he'd said, gesturing to the diverse crowd. "You changed all of us. Even Mother's talking about modernizing the family's approach to philanthropy." Sarah's phone chimed with a message from her assistant. The next quarter's bookings were already at capacity, with a waiting list that reflected Millbrook Heights' evolving demographics. The chapel had become more than a wedding venue. It was a symbol of what community could be when barriers fell and traditions expanded to embrace new stories. The Entrepreneur Award caught the afternoon light, casting a warm glow across her office. Sarah smiled, remembering the check that had started it all. Margaret's attempt to maintain the old order had instead funded its transformation. Sometimes the best revenge wasn't just success, but success that lifted everyone higher. Outside her window, another celebration began, the chapel bells ringing out across a changed landscape. Their sound carried a new message now, not of exclusion or privilege, but of welcome, of possibility, of traditions strong enough to grow and embrace the future without forgetting their past. St. Augustine's Chapel official venue, policy non-discrimination clause. St. Augustine's Chapel celebrates love in all its forms. We do not discriminate based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, cultural background, or social status. All couples receive equal consideration for date selection and venue services. Booking procedures: first come, first served basis. No preferential treatment based on social connections. Transparent pricing structure applicable to all clients. Merit-based vendor selection. Community commitment. We pledge to maintain this venue as a space where all love stories are honored, all traditions are respected, all celebrations are welcomed, all families are embraced. Signed, Sarah Bennett, owner, Wild Tea and Venue Management, LLC. December 2025, Sarah stood in the newly renovated bridal suite, adjusting her wedding dress, different from the one she'd worn a year ago, just as she was different. Through the window, she could see guests arriving for her wedding to Michael Chen, the architectural historian who'd helped her preserve the chapel's heritage while transforming its purpose. They'd met during the renovation process, his passion for historical buildings matching her vision for inclusive spaces. He'd understood immediately what she was trying to achieve with the chapel, seeing beyond the revenge narrative to the deeper mission of transformation. "Your mother's got the guests from both sides mingling in the garden," her assistant reported, with a grin. "I think she's teaching Margaret Richardson how to make her famous punch. Never thought I'd see that." The guest list was its own testament to change. The Richardsons were there, not out of social obligation, but as genuine participants in the chapel's evolution. Rebecca had helped plan the multicultural elements, honoring Michael's Chinese heritage. Catherine had contributed family stories for the venue's historical display. Even Margaret had surprised everyone by volunteering her garden roses for the centerpieces. "The Richardson Christmas Gala decor is still up," Michael had noted during their final planning session. "Think anyone will mind that we're getting married under both Christmas lights and Chinese lanterns?" Sarah had laughed, loving how perfectly that combination represented their journey. "I think it's exactly right," she'd replied. "The chapel's always been about blending traditions to create something new." Now, standing in her office-turned-bridal suite, Sarah reviewed the venue policy she'd crafted after buying the chapel. It had become more than a business document. It was a declaration of principles, a promise to the community, and a reminder of how far they'd all come. James had arrived early, respecting her wishes to avoid any awkwardness. "I brought something you might want for the historical display," he'd said, handing her a small box. Inside was the check Margaret had written, never cashed, along with the original chapel deed. Some things deserve to be remembered. The chapel bells began their ceremony call, their sound carrying across a transformed Millbrook Heights. Through her window, Sarah watched the diverse crowd settling into pews that had once been informally segregated by social status. Dr. Patel sat beside Catherine Richardson, their hospital board collaboration having blossomed into genuine friendship. Elizabeth Whitman and her artist husband chatted with Rebecca about the chapel's next community art installation. "Ready?" her father asked, appearing at the door in his new suit, his eyes bright with pride. Quite a different wedding from the last time we tried this. Sarah took one last look at the venue policy framed on her wall. The document represented everything she'd fought for, not just her own right to celebrate love her way, but everyone's right to do the same. "Very different," she agreed, taking his arm. "This time, we're celebrating exactly who we are." The wedding. March began, but with a twist. Traditional processional music blended with Chinese melodies, just as Christmas lights twinkled alongside red lanterns. As Sarah prepared to walk down the aisle, she caught Margaret Richardson dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. Some kinds of revenge changed nothing, but sometimes, if you were lucky, revenge transformed into revolution, and revolution into Renaissance. The chapel bells rang out, celebrating not just one love story, but all love stories finally free to be told. Millbrook Heights Lifestyle Magazine. Where Are They Now? Special edition 5th anniversary of the Chapel Revolution, December 2030, when Sarah Bennett Chen accepted a check meant to buy her silence 5 years ago. No one could have predicted how thoroughly that single act would transform Millbrook Heights' social landscape. Today, St. Augustine's Chapel stands as the cornerstone of a changed community, its success spawning 3 additional venues under the Wild Tea and Venue Management banner. The chapel taught us that tradition doesn't have to be a barrier. Sarah explains, showing us around her latest acquisition, the former Richardson Country Club, now reimagined as an inclusive community centre. It can be a foundation for building something better. The Richardson family's journey has been equally remarkable. Rebecca Richardson, now CEO of the modernized Richardson Foundation, has partnered with Wild Tea Management to establish similar inclusive venues across the Northeast. Sarah didn't just change our family's perspective, Rebecca notes. She showed us a better way to honor our legacy. Margaret Richardson, once the architect of social exclusion, now chairs the Foundation's diversity initiative. "Pride can blind you to possibility," she admits, watching her grandchildren play with Sarah's twins in the chapel garden. "Sometimes it takes losing everything to see what really matters." The twins, Lucy and Henry, represent their own kind of transformation. Born through surrogacy to Sarah and Michael Chen, with Rebecca Richardson serving as godmother, they toddle through the chapel's halls as living symbols of bridged divides and healed wounds. James Richardson found his own path, finally breaking, free from family expectations, to start an environmental law practice. He recently married an environmental activist he met during a pipeline protest. Their wedding, held at the chapel, featured solar-powered lighting and sustainable local cuisine. "Sarah's courage inspired me to finally be myself," he shared at the reception. Catherine Richardson, now in her 80s, still holds court at chapel events, sharing stories of its evolution with newcomers. "This was never just about weddings," she observes. "It was about a community learning to celebrate all its stories." The chapel's impact extends beyond celebrations. Its success inspired a movement across Millbrook Heights. Exclusive social clubs reopened with inclusive policies. Historical venues modernized their approaches, and the rigid social hierarchy that once defined the town gave way to a more vibrant, diverse community. The Richardson Bennett Community Center hosts monthly cultural festivals, bringing together traditions that once occupied separate social spheres. Dr. Priya Patel, whose wedding once made headlines, now runs the center's multicultural program. We're not just planning parties, she explains. We're building bridges. Elizabeth Whitman's real estate firm, specializing in repurposing historic properties for community use, has expanded to 3 states. Sarah showed us that preservation and progress can work together, she says. It's about honoring the past while creating space for new stories. The chapel itself continues to evolve. The latest renovation added a museum wing documenting its journey from exclusive sanctuary to inclusive haven. The installation includes Margaret's original check, never cashed, displayed alongside the venue's groundbreaking non-discrimination policy. Sarah and Michael recently welcomed their 3rd child, a daughter named Hope. It feels right, Sarah says, watching her family play in the garden where she once planned a very different future. This place has always been about hope. Hope for change, hope for understanding, hope for a community where everyone's story deserves to be celebrated. The chapel bells still ring out across Millbrook Heights, but their message has changed. They no longer announce exclusive social triumphs or carefully curated celebrations. Instead, they herald something far more precious: the simple, profound joy of people coming together, exactly as they are, to share their most precious moments. As the sun sets behind St. Augustine's Gothic windows, casting rainbow lights across generations of changed hearts, Sarah reflects on the journey that brought them here. Sometimes, she muses, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's getting better. Better than the hurt, better than the exclusion, better than anyone thought. Impossible. The chapel bells chime in agreement, their sound carrying across a transformed landscape, calling everyone home.